Hi everyone, this is City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel today. Today I have another layout that I made using the April My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. The first thing I'm going to do is take two very large angles that I'm cutting out here and cover them with some strips of paper that I'm going to be doing some weaving on. Now I kind of practiced on the smaller one that I just put aside because I know that the weaving on that one won't show. So I learned a couple of things doing that kind of practice run, and now I'm making the purple one where the weaving will show. I'm going to be weaving together the paper at the very top where the horizontal and vertical strips come together. So I'm not putting adhesive underneath the strips in those areas. I'm attaching down those 1/2-inch strips, and there's going to be 4 going in each direction. Now that I have 4 strips going in one direction, I'm going to start putting the strips in the other direction. And I put the adhesive down and I start weaving from the top rather than attaching the bottom of the strip down and then weaving afterwards. And the reason for that is that when weaving, the strip will get a little bit shorter and I don't want to attach it on the bottom, and then when I get to the part where I have to weave, the strip that's left isn't long enough to go to the edge. I hope that that makes sense. So here I'm doing the same thing. I'm weaving first, and then once I weave, I'm attaching down the bottom of the strip to the adhesive that I've already put down. If you wanted to make a layout like this, it's really not necessary to weave. You could always just cut the strips of paper at a 45-degree angle and have them meet at the top. But I just thought that this would add a nice little detail, and it really didn't take too long. After I did the weaving, then I realized that I had to attach down the edges of the strips, so I'm using the ATG adhesive to secure those down. Now that the 2 angles are complete, I'm ready to attach them down to some paper. And the paper that's in the collection this month is the Prima Watercolor Floral Collection. The background paper that you see here is one of the papers from that collection. And I thought since it was neutral, it would be perfect for adding lots of color and embellishments to it. So I want to attach down both of the angles, and I want to make sure that they're positioned evenly on the layout. So I'm just measuring up from the bottom to make sure that they both hit the paper on both sides at the same point. I also traced around them with a pencil so that when I do some mixed media, I'll know where the mixed media goes. In order to get the paper ready for mixed media, I cover the whole thing with some clear gesso. And then you can see here that I'm using my finger to spread out some white gesso as well. And the white gesso is just going to go in the areas around where those 2 angles are going. So I'm using those pencil lines that I made, and those pencil lines let me know where to spread the white gesso. The purpose of the gesso is to fade out the pattern paper a little bit. And since the pattern paper is very, very light, almost white, the gesso doesn't really make a big difference in the appearance of the final layout. I do like the fact, though, that the gesso, the white gesso, provides a really nice barrier between the mixed media that's put down the layout and the pattern paper. The clear gesso creates a barrier as well, but there's something about the white gesso that I just prefer a little bit. I feel like the application of the mixed media is a little smoother. There's some quality that I can't quite put my finger on that makes me prefer the white gesso a little bit. You can see here that I'm using a dauber, and I'm not only inking the edges of this big angle, but I also ran my dauber along the part that's woven and some of the other parts. But because some parts of the paper are raised in the woven section, the ink kind of highlights those spots. So I tried this time not just inking the edges, but just kind of rubbing the dauber over different parts of the flat surface of the paper. Now I'm getting started on my mixed media background. I'm using several different sprays in pink, and I'm only going to be putting pink on the background. The reason for that is I have the angle in purple and I have an angle in blue, and the other prominent color in this paper collection is pink. So I thought that if I just use pink on the background, that would help those 2 angles pop off the page. If I use purple and blue, it might cause them to kind of blend in. You can see here I'm using the packaging technique to add some Distress Oxide to the background. I have Distress Oxide sprays, but I'm using my pad here because that's what was handy. That's in Tattered Rose. And I'm also using a Tattered Angels Glimmer Mist. I'm using a Nuvo spray, and I'm also using some Dylusion sprays. And in some cases I'm mixing them together, and I'm just applying them to the background with the packaging, and I'm trying to use those pencil guides. They're not super visible anymore because I put so much gesso on the background, but I'm trying to use the pencil lines, and I'm also, as you saw, placing the angles back on the page to see how everything looks. And I do that several times as I go along. So always with the color on the background, I always try to put several layers. I don't want to have just one layer. I feel that it makes the color much more deep and rich and interesting when there are several layers, and also when there are several different shades of the same color. At the same time, I don't want to add so much color to the background that the background competes with all the other things that I'm putting on the layout, so I try to be careful of that too. Luckily, with this layout, I'm using pink, and pink tends to dry much lighter than the color that's put on, so you kind of need a lot of layers of it. I put down some pink splatters, and I'm also adding some watered down white acrylic paint to add some white splatters to the background. In the end, the mixed media that's on this layout is very subtle, which is very rare for me. Usually I do not make subtle backgrounds, but in this particular one, the mixed media just kind of peeks out a little bit from behind those angles. I decided to pop up both of those angles, so I covered the back of both of them with some fun foam. I attached them down using ATG adhesive, and now I'm just trimming off the excess. And I use those measurements that I made before to attach them down in the correct place. I originally had a different photo, and I didn't like the way that photo looked, so I do end up switching that out. And then I realized that despite all my planning and drawing of pencil lines, there really wasn't enough mixed media that was on that left side underneath the blue angle. So I took some pinks and I just used my paintbrush, and I'm just adding a little bit more color there so that it doesn't draw your eye there because there's no color and there's color everywhere else. And you can see here that I rotated the layout so that the angles point, instead of up, they point to the side. And I just like the way that looked better. Just wanted to give that a try. I also switched out the picture, and I thought this picture was perfect because my daughter's wearing a pink shirt and her boyfriend is wearing a bluish, maybe even a little bit lavenderish shirt. So I thought that matched and just kind of went with the mood of these papers much better. Now I'm using the stencil that was in the kit to add some modeling paste to the background. You could see that the stencil is kind of lines of scrolls, and that's a Prima stencil. And so I'm just using one line. I'm putting down some modeling paste that's mixed with white acrylic paint just to take that gray tone out of the modeling paste. I'm putting the modeling paste through the stencil using a little plastic palette knife, and then I'm drying it so that I don't end up smudging the modeling paste when I put on more of it. Sometimes the stencil can smudge what you've already put down. Here I'm mounting the photo. First I mount it on some white cardstock. Then I mount it on some of the pink pattern paper that was in the kit. And you can see here that I'm using my scissors to distress the edges to give it a little more of a tattered look. And now I'm just going back in and emphasizing some of those tattered edges a little bit more, making a few more bends. And now I'm using some Distress Oxide and a dauber to ink the edges of the pattern paper, and I actually remember to do that before I attach it down to another piece of pattern paper. Usually I remember afterwards, and then I have to peel it back up again. Now I'm using some Jane Davenport paints that I had in my stash, and I'm just going to make some splatters. These just seem to be just the right colors for this particular pattern paper collection. So I'm adding some purple splatters, and the names of the colors are Look at Me Lilac and Minty Fresh, and those are both matte acrylic paints. And I don't include all the footage of me adding the splatters because I spend a considerable amount of time adding splatters. You can see that I added them in purple and I added them in that blue color, and I mainly concentrated them around the angles. I'm using a dauber and some distress oxide to add some color to the outside edge of the layout. You don't really see that in the photos that I take of it, but I like the way that it looks in person, and it will go along with the ink that I added to the angles. Off camera, I added some adhesive foam to the back of the photo just to pop it up a little bit. I put some ATG adhesive on the back of the foam so that I can attach the photo or the photo cluster to the very center of the layout. Now, finally, all of the major elements of the page are in place and the mixed media is done, and it's time to embellish the layout. In this month's kit, there were 2 ephemera packs. One of them was all florals, which I loved, and then the other one was other things you need on your layout, like titles and some other images. So here I am trying a whole bunch of different embellishments and just trying to figure out where I want the clusters to go. In addition to the die cuts or the ephemera pieces, I'm also using some of the Prima flowers that were included in the kit. And I'm going to be making 3 clusters. One is on top of the photo, one's to the right of the photo, and one is below the photo. So now I'm just trying to decide what I want in each cluster and how large I want each cluster to be. And I'm just trying to spread all of the colors around so that there are all of the colors in each of the clusters. Mostly off camera, I attach down all of the elements that are in each cluster using Liquitex Heavy Duty Gel Medium with a matte finish. I also use the dauber and I ink the edges of the die cuts on the page, and in that way all of the paper elements on the page are all consistent in that the edges have been inked. Once all the clusters have been attached down, I go in with some die cut florals. I just don't feel like any cluster of flowers is complete without a few die cuts to kind of brighten them up and extend them out a little bit. And I also feel like they make the clusters look a little bit more realistic. Lately, when I'm buying dies, I try to remind myself that the only dies that I really use regularly are my floral dies. So I try to stick to buying floral dies because I use those constantly. And another embellishment that I use all the time is photo corners. You can see off to the right, there's a punch. That's the EK Success Scalloped Photo Corner Punch, and I use that frequently. So I cut out some photo corners from the pattern paper, and I added those to my photo. Now I'm putting my title down on the page. It is Smile, and I'm using some thickers that we got in a past My Creative Scrapbook kit. I'm using some ATG adhesive to attach down the photo corners. For this layout, I decided to put a photo corner in each of the 4 corners. Sometimes I just put 2, but on this one, I just thought it would be nice to bring some color to each of the corners. Now I'm working on a little cluster that I'm going to put in the upper right-hand corner. And that sentiment that I am working on right now says, "You make me smile even when I'm not with you." So right now I'm trimming off the white edge, and I also trimmed off a little hand on there that I just decided I didn't want to include. And I'm also going to use some of that fun foam to pop it up off the background. It's just going to be a very small cluster, but I just thought that popping it up would add a little bit more attention to it. The only other thing that I'm going to add to that cluster is one little Prima flower. The next thing I'm going to add are some pearls. I've seen a lot of scrapbookers add some art stones to their layouts, and since I have these pearls and they're pearls that don't have a hole in them, and they're in all different sizes, but they're all very small sizes, I thought I could use those kind of in the same way that art stones are used. So I'm taking some of that heavy duty gel medium and I'm using a paintbrush to have some of those pearls stick to it, and then I'm just spreading those around in some of the little places in the clusters that just look a little empty, and the pearls just add another texture to the background, and I didn't think that we needed to have more color on the background, so I thought that white would be the perfect choice for the pearls. I'm going to add a little pearl to each of the photo corners. Even though I'm not sure you're going to be able to see the photo corners on the bottom, I add one to those as well. Now I'm going to use some white heavy gesso. You can also use white acrylic paint if you want. And I'm using this little sponge that I've had for many, many years, decades even. And I'm dipping it in the white gesso, and I'm just kind of dabbing it all around the clusters. And that just kind of helps to add a cohesion to the whole layout. And I learned that from Marilyn Rivera, and I think it can sometimes just bring the whole layout together. And although I add most of the heavy gesso to the flowers and the other elements that are in the larger clusters, I do also add it to some of the die cuts and some of the pattern paper and some of the other flat elements on the page. Now I'm adding some more white splatters. I had put some on the background earlier, but I also wanted to add some to the clusters. And this kind of serves the same purpose as the heavy gesso. It kind of brings the whole layout together and makes everything kind of look like one unit. I wanted to add a little something more to the layout, so I decided to use this stamp that was in the kit this month. And you can see that I already used the stamp to stamp and emboss some gold butterflies off to the left. But for this layout, I wanted to make some butterflies in white. So I get my trusty embossing pad that has adhesive on it, and I stamp out the image of the butterfly. Then I pour some white Martha Stewart embossing powder over the top. And I'm using vellum to create these butterflies. You might have seen I tapped the vellum from the back just to get off some of the extra embossing powder. And then I'm pouring it back into the container. And now I am ready to heat emboss. So I get my heat tool and I heat each butterfly until it's all beautiful and sparkly. And then after I'm done, I fussy cut out 2 of the butterflies. I'm just going to use one above the photo and one below the photo. And then I attach those down. I fold them in half just to make their wings look a little bit more realistic. So that the title wasn't the only gold thing on the layout, I add some gold pearls, just a couple of them to each cluster, and I also add some white pearls to the center of each butterfly. And then that completes the layout. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Thank you for sticking with me to the end of this video. It was a long one. I hope if you like this video, you'll give it a thumbs up, and you can check out all of the My Creative Scrapbook kits for this month on the website. I'll put the link in the description box. I hope that everybody has a fantastic day, and I hope to see everybody again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.